Well, hello, my name is SherriAnneDuffy-King, and I'm going to be continuing reading The Title of a Crucified Innocence from Chapter 15, Bells Ring, But I Don't Sing. After he left, Evie looked back at her frightened self in the mirror, wiping her eyes, smearing what dignity she had left. The suns began to set, leaving the sky dimming with a breath of fresh air. Walking over toward the window, looking down at the courtyard, hoping that Evie could escape this mess that she was entangled in, what Evie saw made her legs shake. At the bottom there were dozens and dozens of people in what looked like a ceremony. Suddenly Evie's head got heavy and the room started to spin, making her dizzier than a dog. Evie grasped the windowsill for support and slid down to the floor, where she sat holding the wall for dear life. An arm grasped Evie's waist and pulled her upward to a standing position, shaking her to make sure that she was okay. Evie's eyes were trained on the floor, but they slowly raised. Her eyes started from the black balloon-shaped pants and sash with a golden dagger being held into place by the sash in his skinned waist. Evie's eyes wandered even farther up his tan, broad chest and his muscular arms. Her mouth fell silently open as his neck, jawbone, and eyes looked so familiar. Chapter 16. Another handy escape for the taking. Without letting Evie speak, he guided her toward another wall, pressing her against the tapestry and bookstand. Voices mingled in the hall, coming closer. Having Evie pinned, his chest against hers, their hearts beating as one. Evie's racing as excitement and passion for the staring man filled her eyesight. Grabbing her wrists and lifting them above her head while moving closer for a more exciting kiss. When he released Evie's arms, she dropped them to her waist to breathe out a pleasureful sigh. A loud noise sounded in the hall, and the next thing Evie knew, Aiden was leading her through the secret passage, the wall behind the bookstand. Soon it closed behind them, and the passage was filled with dusty darkness. He guided Evie by his right palm. The feeling of it was warm and comforting to her left hand. Their fingers tangled together. They moved fast and carefully, not to make a sound and disrupt the commotion going up and above and around them. The halls echoed as drips of water seeped from cracks, sweetly falling to the ground, leaving small pools behind in their wake. After traveling for a quarter of a mile in this maze, Evie's feet began to ache under the pressure of her body. She didn't know how, but Aiden knew that Evie's feet were pestering her. He stopped quickly, letting go of her hand and swiftly picking her up, holding Evie like a baby doll. It was sweet and made Evie's heart skip a couple of beats. So trusting this man with her life, and even more with her heart, Evie leaned her head back, and she felt his heart racing and flutters as he whispered, "We're almost out, I promise, my love." His very accent was filling Evie's veins with heat and passion. She longed for him even more than she realized the first time she saw him, when they met by that magnificent waterfall. Although thinking back, Evie felt as though she's met him someplace else. Every time she tried to think back on those memories, Evie's mind would get hazy, filled with a jabbing pain that makes her head wound hurt as though it was going to be ripped open again. Evie's breathing came in heavy and wheezy. Drowsing off was easy from all the fatigue and stress of the events following waking up in that dreadful cage that made her feel like an animal. Aiden stopped for a second more, then sat Evie down on her feet to open another passageway door. This one let light into the darkened tunnel, burning her eyes. Evie went to wipe away the tears that started to form from the blinding light. She was stopped by Aiden as he wiped them for her and gave her a kiss while saying in a joyous tone, "We're out. There's Ithaca. We can leave and never return." With that revelation, Evie told him that her brother went missing, and he said that he understands everything. Aiden led the way into the woods with reassurance, taking Evie to his black steed, which rushed to them at a whisper of a whistle from his soft lips. He placed his firm palms around Evy's waist and lifted her up onto the back of the horse to guide her towards safety. The ride was brisk and left Evy's cheekbones chapped and sore. After riding for a couple of miles, her butt began to get sensitive to the attention the seat was giving her. Just before it got too numb, they stopped, and Aiden helped Evy off like a perfect gentleman. As soon as her feet hit the ground, Aiden lifted the palm of his hand and smacked the back end of the horse. It stood on its hind legs and looked as though it was reaching for the stars, then galloped off into the brush of the trees. After it left, Aiden grasped Evy's hand, and in his fingers, their fingers entwined, and heat rushing in her cheeks and more. Evy didn't notice before, but a small cabin hid under in a bunch of tree brush and vines near the little river bank coursing around it. Little pebbly rocks glistened in the sunlight, leaving sparks of light illuminating off of its lime branches, while grass surrounded the river. Chapter 17. Enveloping Strange Tales. Guiding Evy toward the cabin, she was mystified at how adorable and ancient it was. How are they to conceal it from passerbyers? It was hidden away from the naked eye. What kind of genius was the person who created it? Questions kept overpowering Evy's cranium. She was trying to sort things out. This place was hidden away from prying eyes. It surprised Evy to the very core. As they walked through the little hidden archway, leaves of green ivy and vines hung everywhere. They hung low like soft sheet, making shade and protection from leaving. A cool comfort cascaded into the atmosphere. Leaves tickled her cheek as they ducked low and moved them aside. Aiden held Evy's hand with great gentility, leading her into the small corridor cut off by the stone and spiral staircase. They began to descend at a hasty pace. At the bottom, Evy slipped and missed the last step and fell slanted into open arms. They lifted her up and sat her back down on solid ground. Evy lifted her gaze up toward the person holding her. To Evy's surprise, it wasn't Aiden. It was someone entirely different. The outline of the man was all that she could see. From what Evy could tell, he was wearing all black, like a robe of some sort. It rustled around his ankles as he stood her up. After removing his palms from around her waist, the man had an intriguing smile that blazed as bright as the moon, peeking through the dark shadows of the night. Evy found herself dumbstruck. Then, at the hint of a curve of his smile, she noticed a couple of teeth that glinted razor-sharp, shimmering in the candlelit room. He turned and led Evy to the next room with Aiden. "Why aren't you the clumsy one? I hear so much about you." The room was dark and full of mildew stench that ricocheted off of the bricks in the walls and seemed to linger. The temperature seemed to drop as Evy entered through the arch of the doorframe. The only light that protruded the darkness seemed to come from a cauldron with an icy blue flame frozen in mid-air, the rim of the glistening coal-black cauldron comfortably encircling it like a snug ring. The flames that were frozen in place seemed to give off a soft, luminous glow that sent magical waves rippling through the air. Chapter 18. Doubts Gone Wry. The mysterious man guided them toward the cauldron. Out of sheer excitement of seeing something as magical as rippling waves, Evy couldn't resist reaching out and grasping her fingers around the misty substance, not knowing what could happen. The oddest sensation spread vigorously through Evy's limbs. leaving a numbness that passed back down her arm toward the palm of her left hand and out of her fingertips. Lime-colored sparks replaced them. Evy instantly thought, at the sight of them, that they would scorch her flesh, leaving horrific scars in their places. Nothing happened. Evy looked up for some sort of answers. Aiden's eyes were focused on her fingers. She was baffled, no answers to explain what was happening. Turning her gaze toward the mysterious man who had a cool contempt about him, his gaze met hers the second she turned her face toward him. His smile even brighter than the last time Evy looked up at him. His jaw clenched in an untidy way, opening his mouth to say, "Thank you, Sir Aiden McTavish, for bringing her here into my clutches. Here is your due for the young maiden." Then his grimy, slime-ridden hand pulled a large bag of coins from his dusty, mite-infested pocket. "You may leave her here now. Be on your way. Shall our paths cross once more in the better time?" Evy's hand went cold. She felt paralyzed, the last of his words amplified in slow motion. She never thought she would feel this way, frozen in time, struck with numbness. Aiden had set her up. Evy had been betrayed by him, which she thought she loved so much. Evy's left hand that had flames turned to ice, shattering to a million pieces as she clenched her fist to her chest. Evy released the grip of her right palm, looking at Aiden, watching him step back after receiving the ruby-red bag covered in dirt, keeping his eyes downcast, his lips turned up to a sheepish grin. He had sold her. Evy's face leaked ice tears that slid down her face to shatter in the dirt-covered stone floor. She couldn't control her tears as he left her in this unknown place. "Do not fear, my dear. You are now my servant, and you shall travel with me and my ship, the Ecuadorian Siren." After his words were not responded toward, his grin turned greedy, stretching out his already marble-colored face. The door swung open with such haste, Evy's heart almost leapt out of her chest. Turning away from the new nameless master, Evy's eyes rested comfortably on a young girl standing in the arched doorway, her hair long and black, lips as red as a blushing rose, eyes green as the vile ocean that they were about to embark onto. Chapter 19, The Voyage to Emptiness. The girl walked toward Evy, stopped, and reached out to grasp her right palm, leading Evy out and away from the dark, dank room. They passed the stairs, headed down a narrow hall lit only by candlelight. Other than that, it was still pretty depressing and dark. The atmosphere gave off an eerie, mellow feeling. Evy followed the beauty into the next room on their left. She followed close behind, the girl's swaying dress. This room was slightly brighter than the last room that they came from. Letting go of Evy's hand, the girl stopped in the center, turning on her heels. The girl began to examine Evy for an inspirational thought. The girl began to undress Evy's pearl hair clips, releasing her auburn tresses to dangle freely down her creamy flesh back. Whilst the girl was in the moment of unclipping her hair, she had to reach up, brushing soft flesh and material together. Their skin touched, and the girl's hair gave off a citrus aroma that filled Evy's lungs. The girl's breath reached up into Evy's ear to whisper in such a melodic tone. Her legs began to quiver, losing all meaning to gravity. Evy felt featherish. "My name is Gabriella. I know exactly who you are." Gabriella's warm, honey-flavored breath rested comfortably on Evy's shoulder. Her mind began to spin in all different directions. Why am I here? Was all Evy could get out, due to sheer panic. Gabriella's response was a mixture of undeniable comfort with a sense of fantastic unrealism to her sensitive ears. You are the chosen one, or so I've been told. A horrific battle is a-brewin'. 2 men have been rivals since they were born, torn from their mother's womb at the same time. Only royalty and Imbala gives twins. These twins have pure hate for each other. Although they don't look alike, they are a form of twin, both evil in their own way. They also were obsessed with the myth of over our elders passed down about a young girl, you, Evy, is all everyone chats about. Since our world shook to an awakening state, the news traveled about you being found unconscious on the embankment. Both men will not yield or end the feud over your hand. They will keep coming after you on either side of the war. The result is the same, utter chaos and destruction. People will die for you, and that is why you are going into hiding with Ollivander and the crew until we can figure out how to dispel their advances. What of my brother? What will I do without him? I need to find him, and we must escape and go home. After saying what Evy's heart yearned to understand, the room turned cold and Gabriella pulled back, eyes as cold as green ice. A harshness overcame her. The tone of her voice soon changed in the same direction. Your brother isn't our concern. Be well aware that we, as in our world, will put our problems in front of you. You will help us solve them before we tend to your selfishness. Gabriella then turned and grabbed a garment out of the oak cedar chest, placing it on the bed. After giving Evy the cold shoulder for at least 15 seconds, Gabriella turned to face her, then began to undoing the wedding dress Evy was wearing, only to toss it violently into the darkest corner to a chair that was covered in dozens of cobwebs. While the material crushed through the ancient webs and landed on the redwood, something moved. Something moved in the shadow depth of the corner. The chair suddenly stood on its hind legs, growling ferociously in a hungry snarl. The seat itself split in two, revealing rows of sharp teeth and a serpent tongue that lashed out around the room, then wiping the material from its snout and sucking it back in like a toad. The sight of something so grisly stunned her. Evy's mouth lay gaped open and her eyes frozen in place, not knowing what just happened, and hoping that the incident wouldn't repeat itself. Evy's fear leapt to the future when some unsuspecting civilian wanted to take a load off and sit on the chair's snout. Her thoughts were rudely disconcerted by a rude and disturbing burp from the satisfied chair, then returning to its natural state. Gabriella watched the magical, monstrous chair, then returned her gaze to Evy's shocked presence. Gabriella's eyes went from cold to warm in a sensitive Gabriella's eyes went from cold to warm and sensitive. Moving behind Evy, Gabriella began to place the nude clothes on her. The mirror standing beside Evy gave her some confidence, looking at Evy's new outfit a little bit satisfied by how normal she looked. Evy was wearing a light blue maid's outfit with a white apron that held her dress tightly against her curving body and hid her modest cleavage. She truly looked like a servant. When Evy was gazing at herself, she realized how truly angry and hurt she felt over Aiden's dishonorable acts of treachery. Her eyes began to swell with pain, while her heart shattered in that instant. Gabriella reached her soft hands toward Evy's face, cradling Evy's chin in her palms. What is wrong, girl? Asking in hushed tones. Evy shook her head, glancing away from Gabriella's curious eyes, but Gabriella's sympathetic ocean-colored eyes showed she cared. Evie's vision began to blur due to the wave of haziness and tears. The haziness held its grip, pulling her sleeve up to wipe away the disappointment that seemed to linger on her face. Nothing, Gabriella. I just don't understand why my fingers began to spark or the reason for all this war that split the world. Gabriella turned and walked away through another door, almost giving up on unanswered questions and finding the truth. Evie felt that Gabriella had abandoned her. Evie sat on the edge of the bed, sulking in unwanted feelings, sitting for a few seconds, waiting. Gabriella suddenly appeared and told Evie to follow her. Evie skirted past the alarming chair, following Gabriella through another door and down some spiral stairs out of the building. The night sky was royal blue with 500,000 dancing stars, relaxing comfortably around a giant planet the size of the moon, with the base converged underwater. It was the most beautiful thing Evie's ever seen, sparkling brighter than all the stars combined. In front of her stood a dock made of cedar wood. Around the dock, water enveloped everything, dark and glimmering in small waves, rippling with life. A minty aroma tickled Evie. The wind brought it against her skin. Behind Evie, two lamps held up by gargoyle statues flickered, giving Gabriella's figure a nice and creepy look. Pine trees hiding in the distance gave the land they were born on a rugged edge. Looking past Gabriella and over the dock from a distance, Evie noticed that the water moved from her left side to her right side. Evie saw that a nice and thick dirt-brown rope sat comfortably around the post, like a web of deceit. It slowly recoiled itself around the post a few more times and slunk over the splintered edge into emptiness like a lifeless slithering serpent. As they approached the rope, a sound caught Evie's attention. A sobbing creature filled the silence with wails of hysterics. Everything went darker. Then, out of habit, Evie decided against good judgment and turned. A green figure at least 10 feet tall stood before her stunned eyes. Evie looked it up and down, unsure of her sanity and if she was seeing what she was seeing. Still in disbelief as water dripped off of the figure, Gabriella ran quickly to the rope and began to untie the twisted slump, looking briefly over Evie's shoulder toward Gabriella. "Evie, hurry, Omnarch!" Unsure of herself or of what she heard, Gabriella's words were slow and drawn out. Evie, on the other hand, couldn't move a muscle from her chest down. Evie's legs stiffened up and her feet were heavy. What's an Omnarch? Is this vile creature an Omnarch?" Evie said over and over again in a repetitive way to herself in her head, silently screaming. Evie felt as heavy as dirt packed tightly down in a bag or box. The Omnarch budged, shaking ferociously. Water leapt free of the monster and scattered wet puddles all over Evie. Now her hair stuck to her face, beginning to knot into tight curls. Teeth glinted red and eyes as black as desolate shimmering water at night in the shadows. He stepped forward and put all of his weight on his right foot, standing less than a couple of feet away from Evie, now towering her like a huge cedar tree. At his side he had a battle axe covered in a multitude of rubies, sapphires, diamonds, with a gold-etched line that wiggled, a uniquely creepy design that sent chills up Evie's spine and made her blood tingle. The sharp ends of the axe was silver-plated. Shaking it a couple of times to air-dry it, he lifted it up high above Evie. Then, after reaching its ultimate height, he began to bring it down with such force her mind was racing with fear as everything went in slow motion again. The axe glinted in the light from the water planet behind Evie, looking into its reflection to see Gabriella throwing the rope into the water and making her way toward Evie. She swears Gabriella's lips were saying the same panicked instruction over and over again. inches from Evy's head. She stuck the palms of her hands in the air in a defensive task. Evy's hands got another numbing sensation that spread through her body, protruding a force field. Still glancing at the axe, Evy's reflection appeared, her eyes letting off a bright mixture of blue, lime, and lavender. Her face was pale and unsure. The shield stretched around Evy and Gabriella. The monster brought down his weapon to have it bounce off and send a shock of electric impulses through him. Something cautiously slithered secretively up on him, letting a gleam give Evy warning. As the sword was thrust under his arm, piercing the skin, releasing blood, the sword slid in as easy as butter knife to butter. He fell effortlessly into the water, sinking into the darkness. Before his head was fully submerged, he winked. Evy was taken back by this gesture. Fingers walked up the back of his head to the top of it. A girl emerged out of the water, resting her palm on his scalp. Skin pale blue and slimy, fingers sucking onto his skin for a tight hold. The webbing glittered as her hair, sopping wet, thick and tangled black. Just as her eyes were, seaweeds clung to her like a magnet. She looked up at Evy and grinned, shards of teeth, at least 3 rows, that protruded, that pushed out as she let out a scream of hunger and impatience. Her fingers tightened as she drug him fully under. Bubbles of a fight rippled to the surface, then nothing. Evy was left there, gaping into the black hell from underneath them. A couple of hands grasped Evy from around her waist to bring them down to her sides, looking back to where the Omnarch used to be standing. Dazed, Evy said the creature's descriptive name aloud. Omnarch? In its place a woman stood, her hair long and brown, with some highlights that glinted off from the planet's light. Her eyes were pure white. She stood there for a moment, examining Evy like a unique, new, shiny toy. Hello, Evy. You sure are something special. I can't help but see into your past, present, and future. You sure are something more than extraordinary. Evy's mouth dropped to a frown then. Everyone keeps telling me this, but but I'm only here for my brother, and if I must go through your hell to get to him, then I will do whatever I have to do to get him back. The woman's smile got even larger at Evy's last spoken words. Ah, I see you are on a grand quest full of many dangerous tasks to find your twin brother, Ashton. The whole time Evy was here, she never once told this woman or anyone that information. How did you know he was my twin? Evy, eyes twinkling. The same way I know that you were to be betrothed to Sir Henry Lockhart. Huh? For someone special, you seem to be a little thick under the scalp. I'm a clairvoyant, the one they call Fortuna. But you, Evy Trinity Bridgewater, can call me Lucinda Bartholomew, or simply, my friends, call me Lucy. I hope soon you'll become an ally and a friend. Nice to meet you, Fortuna. Miss Bartholomew? Sorry, I mean Lucy. Smiling, Evy raised her hand politely and shook Lucy's. Gabriella coughed. Hurry up, Lucy and Evy, before another vile water cretin, or Omnarch comes after us again. With a large sigh, They followed Gabriella to a most unusual sailor. The whole boat was darkly painted and glimmered like the water underneath it. A large post stood up at the tip, and there was a strange small hunched wolf gargoyle bowing with his tongue out and rippling like a wave with a stone, that reflected the same color that came from Evie when she would do strange stuff. Chapter 20. Waking Up on a Bed of Water. Evie cracked her eyelids to the dim light, and it wasn't easy, especially when it was coming through the cylinder window above the canopy. Raising herself was tricky, as well, when the bed she was in was made up of netted sheet hooked up on opposite walls stretching out. Evie pulled the thin blanket off of her and raised her legs up to bring them over the edge. While she was trying not to flip out of bed and land on her face, she began to sit up. The smell of pine wood lingered in the atmosphere. Evie figured the smell was coming from the log walls. The cabin was but a small chamber or cell. Across from her, a cedar chest was cracked open. Hopping off of the bed, Evie decided to make her way across the room to investigate it. Tiptoeing over the cool floorboards, Evie's mind filled with curiosity. Looking over the edge of its walls, a sheet of parchment lay tame and delicate. In black ink etched in white paper, it read, "Dearest Evie, for you, XOXOXO. P.S. Come see the captain. When ready, Finn." What? Setting the paper aside, Evie noticed a bundle of clothes were packed with a shiny pair of black boots. Thinking they must be for her, Evie began to undress the white apron and make her way through the blue dress, dropping them on the cool maple floorboards. She turned back to the chest to pull out a pair of stockings, some black trousers, white blouse with a black vest. The only 3 remaining items left in the chest were a lavender ribbon to tie back Evie's auburn curls, the black boots and sword wrapped in a black sash. Looking at herself and at how amazing she looked, remembering the stories of famous pirates that made her smile, an adventurous journey she will go on for her twin brother and this world. They were both fortunate Evie was here. In their survival through the gruesome battles lurking upon them in the dark shadows of life.